In 1678, a Scottish woman named Isabel Young was chained to a church wall for 24 hours in the dead of January. Her neck locked inside a ring of iron, her body shaking from the cold, her bladder giving out in front of her neighbors as they silently judged the reason she stood there. Her crime? She believed feeding starving children mattered more than obeying the Sabbath. The worst part is this: the same priests who preached compassion on Sunday were the ones who fastened that collar around her throat the very next morning. And Isabel was only one of an estimated 10,000 Scottish women punished this way. Those iron collars still hang in churches across Scotland today, with the victims' names carved directly into them. Before this video ends, you'll understand why historians tried to erase this story for nearly 3 centuries. You'll see the actual collars. You'll hear the names of the women who wore them. If you want more buried histories they never taught you in school, make sure you subscribe and like the video, and leave a comment too. This is the story of the Jew, Scotland's iron collar of humiliation. Between 1500 and 1800, in nearly every village and town across Scotland, churches transformed into torture chambers. Not for thieves, not for heretics, but for women who spoke too boldly. Kirk sessions, the church courts, were granted legal authority to punish what they called moral crimes. And here's the twisted truth behind it all. 90% of the people punished for scolding, for arguing, for gossip, for having what they called a loose tongue, were women. When men shouted in the street, the Kirk session called it passionate debate. When women did the same, it became a crime. The punishment was the Jew, an iron collar bolted to a chain fixed into the church wall or the town market cross. Sometimes the sentence lasted hours, sometimes days. It was always public. It was always humiliating. Merchants' wives wore the Jew. Bakers, midwives, even wealthy women could end up in iron if they angered the wrong person. Status didn't save you, it only reduced your time. The church, meant to be a place of refuge, became a stage of torment where the same neighbors you'd lived beside your whole life gathered to watch your suffering. The Jew was more than punishment, it was a warning. A message to every other woman in that village. Your voice is dangerous. Your opinions are offenses. Your silence is required. Picture the device. A ring of iron, 10 to 15 pounds, hinged on one side and locked on the other. The inside just wide enough for your neck, but never comfortably. A chain 2 to 4 feet long bolted into stone. You can't sit. You can't lie down. You can't even lean without the weight wrenching your head forward or the chain yanking you backward. Within an hour your neck is burning. Within 2 your shoulders are on fire. By the 3rd, your legs tremble uncontrollably because you've been standing the entire time. The Kirk sessions mounted these collars at eye level so that every passerby looked directly into your face. Often they placed the Jew beside the church entrance, meaning that every Sunday the entire congregation walked past you. Some collars were fitted with bells, ringing with every tiny movement you made. You hadn't eaten properly because bending forward cuts into your throat. You're desperate for water, but drinking is nearly impossible. And there is no place to relieve yourself. You soil your clothes in front of neighbors. In front of family. The humiliation wasn't accidental. It was intentional. The goal was degradation. If you were unlucky enough to be collared in winter like Isabel, you weren't just standing in shame. You were fighting frostbite, hypothermia, and potential death. The National Museum of Scotland still preserves the Kirk session records. Here's a real entry from 1590 in Lanark. Janet Murdoch for scolding her neighbor, to stand at the Jew 4 hours on market day. 4 hours for scolding. Examine the surviving collars. The rust stains mark where moisture collected, sweat, tears, and blood from the metal cutting into skin. The scratch marks near the chain anchor? Forensic historians believe those are nail marks from women desperately clawing for stability. Here are the recorded crimes that sent women into the Jew. Aberdeen, 1611. Margaret Leslie, offense, sharp words with her husband in the street. That was enough to earn her 6 hours in iron. Meanwhile, when men argued publicly, the church called it spirited debate and sent them home. Stirling, 1590. Bessie Atkin, offense, chastising the minister's wife about poor relief. Let me translate what that really meant. Bessie's crime was simply criticizing how the church was distributing charity to the poor. She thought the system was unfair, so she spoke up. That was enough for the church to punish her. Edinburgh, 1623. Christian Lurie. Her offense? Saying that a merchant's wife had bought cloth from traveling tinkers. And the thing is, Christian was telling the truth. But the rumor embarrassed a wealthy family, so Christian spent 3 days in the Jew. They removed her only for Sunday service, then chained her right back up. Glasgow, 1634. 2 women argued over access to well water. The Kirk session didn't mediate, didn't negotiate, they collared both of them facing each other for 8 straight hours. They had to stand there, locked in iron, forced to stare at each other's humiliation. Do you see the pattern now? This wasn't about noise. It wasn't about rudeness. It wasn't about keeping public peace. Look closely at what these women were punished for. They challenged husbands. They criticized authority. They embarrassed wealthy families. They fought over basic resources. The Jew wasn't designed to stop arguments, it was designed to control what women said and who they said it to. Especially when their words threatened men, church leaders, or anyone with power. Professor Louise Yeoman studied hundreds of Kirk session records. Her research showed that 70% of all scolding charges were women criticizing church officials or civic authorities. This wasn't about morality. This was about power. And maybe the most absurd case of all happened in Perth in 1605. A woman was collared for 2 hours because she laughed too loudly on market day. A male witness testified, this is a direct quote, that her laughter disturbed the peace and dignity of godly commerce. Godly commerce. She laughed too loud while people were shopping. 2 hours in iron. But among all these stories, one woman did something extraordinary. Her name was Margaret, and her crime is something almost every woman has done at least once. She defended herself. Before we get to her rebellion, you need to understand the real women who wore these collars. They were not statistics, they had lives, families, and hopes that were crushed under iron. Helen Guthrie, 1661. Her neighbor stole her hen. 1 chicken at a time when losing it could mean going hungry. Helen accused her publicly. The Kirk session punished Helen instead, 12 hours in the Jew on market day. And here is the heartbreaking part. Later, the neighbor confessed she had stolen the hen. The Kirk session's response? A single line in the record. Better 10 honest women shamed than 1 guilty go free. Read that again. Better to torture 10 innocent women than risk letting 1 guilty person escape. But Helen's suffering was nothing compared to what happened to Isabel Young. Dunfermline, 1678. January. Isabel argued that feeding starving children mattered more than strict Sabbath rules. The woman she argued with disagreed. The Kirk session sided with strict observance. Isabel was sentenced to 24 hours in the Jew, in the dead of winter. Imagine Scotland in January. Freezing winds. Isabel forced to stand outside all day, all night, and into the next day. The iron collar conducting the cold straight into her bones. She survived barely. The Abbey records include a medical note. Isabel Young lost 3 toes to frostbite. For the rest of her life, every step she took reminded her of the price she paid for having an opinion. But then came the woman I told you about. Margaret Hutcherson. Edinburgh. 1692. A widow who ran a small bakery. A bailiff came to collect taxes she couldn't afford. When she couldn't pay, he seized her bread oven, her livelihood, her only way to survive. Margaret did what any of us would do. She protested. She called the bailiff unfair. She called the tax collection corrupt. 3 days in the Jew. Removed only at night. But this is where her story becomes extraordinary. Day 1, apologize and we'll release you. She refused. Day 2, same demand. Same refusal. Day 3, something changed. The community began bringing her food, covering her with blankets, standing beside her, supporting her. For the first time, community pressure forced the bailiff to back down. He reduced her debt. He returned her oven. Margaret Hutcherson's refusal to be silent became the first recorded case where public solidarity successfully challenged the Kirk session's authority. But the scars she and thousands of other women carried lasted a lifetime. The women who survived the Jew carried scars for the rest of their lives. Physical scars. Neck abrasions that never healed properly. Permanent circulation issues. Nerve damage from hours, sometimes days, of compression. Social scars. Once you were collared, you were marked forever. Labeled a troublemaker. Your reputation shattered beyond repair. Economic scars. Every hour in iron was an hour you couldn't work. And for women already living at the edge of starvation, lost income could mean lost survival. Today, the National Museum of Scotland preserves 23 surviving jugs. Each one has a story. Each one has a provenance. At Duddingston Kirk in Edinburgh, there's an iron collar with deep scratches on the inside. Not random scratches, fingernail scratches. Forensic specialists believe a woman, whose name and fate we will never know, tried to rip that collar off her own neck with her bare hands, clawing at solid iron in desperation. Those marks are still there, frozen in time. And when you look closely at the church records, an even darker pattern emerges. The same crime, wildly different sentences. Woman A scolds her neighbor, 2 hours in the Jew. Woman B scolds her neighbor, 2 days in the Jew. What? Because woman A argued with someone poor. Woman B argued with the minister's cousin. Selective enforcement. Relatives of ministers? Almost never punished. Wives of wealthy merchants? Usually fined instead. Poor women? Repeatedly collared, harshly punished, publicly shamed. And here's the detail historians hesitate to talk about. Punishments increased dramatically during periods of social unrest. Whenever communities questioned authority, suddenly more women found themselves chained. The Jew wasn't justice. It was control. It was fear. It was psychological warfare. Your punishment wasn't private. Your humiliation was a public event. Everyone watched. Everyone learned. Every woman in the crowd absorbed the message. Speaking up is dangerous. Challenging authority is deadly. Silence is survival. Imagine being a 10-year-old girl watching your mother chained to a church wall for arguing about bread prices. What does that teach you about your voice? About your worth? About the cost of having an opinion? This fear passed down through generations. Women began policing each other, because reporting your neighbor first might keep suspicion away from you. The Kirk sessions didn't just punish women, they turned women against each other. But there's a part of this history that's even more disturbing, and most records tried to hide it. The sexual dimension. Women chained in the Jew couldn't protect their modesty. They urinated publicly. They menstruated publicly. The heavy iron collar tore clothing, exposing their bodies. And the records, always vague, always brief, mention men tormenting, mocking, and harassing collared women. Historians say the explicit details were intentionally censored. But we know enough to understand the truth. The vulnerability was deliberate. The degradation was the point. This wasn't just punishment. It was domination. So when did it finally end? In the 1730s, early Enlightenment thinkers began criticizing the Church's power. Philosophers like David Hume argued that Kirk sessions had too much control over civil life. In 1747, the Heritable Jurisdictions Act weakened those church courts even further. Change came slowly, painfully slowly. The shocking part? The last documented uses of the Jew occurred in the early 1800s. Some churches kept them mounted as warnings until the 1860s. Why so long? Because the church resisted losing its grip on moral authority. Because powerful men benefited from silent, obedient women. And because every time someone demanded abolition, defenders insisted. But it's tradition. Only in 1857 did legal reforms finally strip church courts of their punitive powers. The jugs were ordered removed, but many churches quietly kept them anyway. Even today in 2025, at least 15 churches in Scotland still display them. Some still have plaques with victims' names carved beside them. Tourism boards call them interesting medieval artifacts. Feminist historians call them what they truly are: physical evidence of systemic oppression. And here's the detail that stays with me the most. At Duddingston Kirk, where that scratched collar sits on the wall, tourists take photos with it. Children reach out and touch it. But no one knows the name of the woman who clawed at that iron. No record tells her story. Her suffering remains preserved in metal, yet her identity is erased. The Jew may be gone as a practice, but the desire to silence women never vanished. It simply evolved. 10,000 women. That's the conservative estimate, based on surviving records from only 15% of Scottish parishes. The true number is almost certainly much higher. The average sentence lasted 6 to 8 hours, but some women endured entire days in iron. And the consequences didn't end when the collar came off. They carried the damage for the rest of their lives. Physical scars, social stigma, economic devastation, and psychological trauma passed silently from one generation to the next. But here's why this history matters right now in 2025. When a woman speaks up in a meeting and is told she's being too aggressive, that's tone policing. When a woman shares an opinion online and receives rape threats, that's digital silencing. When a woman reports harassment and gets labeled difficult, that's professional punishment. The tools have changed. The goal hasn't. Silence women. Control women. Punish women for using their voices. We may not chain women to church walls anymore. We may think we've evolved beyond that brutality, but we still tell women to smile more, to talk softer, to be less intimidating, to stay in their lane. Her name was Helen. Her crime was speaking. Her punishment was silence. Her name was Isabel. Her crime was compassion. Her punishment was frostbite. Her name was Margaret. Her crime was resistance. Her punishment was 3 days in iron. And then there were the thousands more. Women whose names were never recorded, whose stories were never preserved, whose suffering lives on only in rusted metal and fading records. The iron collar of shame may no longer hang around women's necks, but the weight of it, the message of it, is still here. So let me ask you this. What would you have been collared for in 1600 Scotland? Disagreeing with your boss? Defending a friend? Speaking your mind? Laughing too loudly? Drop your answer in the comments. I want to hear your perspective. If this opened your eyes to how far we've come, and how far we still have to go, hit that like button. Their voices were stolen. Yours doesn't have to be.